fish Confucius had hoped for. Confucius was poor, and to make ends meet he took on a number of jobs, including clerk in a granary store and zookeeper to a menagerie of sacred animals. In his spare time he studied history, music, and liturgy, quickly gaining a reputation as the most learned man in Lu. Confucius was ambitious. He hoped to achieve a high position in the administration so that he could put his ideas into practice. Not surprisingly, the fun-loving rulers had no wish to employ such a spoil-sport to run their domains, and Confucius's applications never got beyond the interview stage. Confucius was an earnest young man who believed in sharing his vast learning with the world. Not a great technique for job interviews. Then, as now, people who couldn't get a job in their chosen field often ended up teaching it. The state of Lu boasted a number of schools teaching court etiquette and ritual to prospective courtiers. These schools were usually staffed by former courtiers who had an expert knowledge of intricate court observances, but had lost their job owing to some inadvertent gaffe, which may also have caused them to lose some intimate possessions even more valued than their salary. Confucius decided to set up a school with a difference. He would instruct political administrators on how to rule. Fortunately, Confucius had an engaging and inspiring personality. No questions were asked about his qualifications, and he soon began attracting pupils. His school appears to have been very similar to those developed by the ancient Greek philosophers during the following centuries. The atmosphere was informal. The master conversed with his pupils, sometimes on foot, sometimes sitting under the shade of a tree. Occasionally the master would deliver a set-piece lecture, but mostly lessons consisted of question-and-answer sessions. The master's replies were often in the form of homilies. If you lead an untrained army into battle, you throw it away. The superior man is sparing in words, but not in deeds. If you don't change your faults, you become even more faulty. These remarks must have appeared almost as banal 2,500 years ago as they do today, yet we are told that Confucius didn't suffer fools gladly. If I indicate one corner of a subject, and the pupil cannot work out the other three for himself, I send him away. There was no room for poltroons or polygons in Confucius's school. He usually had about 24 pupils, ranging from princes to paupers. The sayings of Confucius that have come down to us are not all banal. Some are contentious, others opaque or enigmatic, and a number are profound. Anyone who does not know the value of words will never understand men. The full life seeks what is in itself. The empty life seeks what appears in others. His remarks are said to contain the occasional bit of quiet Oriental humour, but this remains beyond the sonic range of most Occidental ears. Confucius was essentially a moral teacher. He was always sincere and distrusted eloquence. His aim was to teach his pupils how to behave properly. If they wished to rule people, they must first learn how to rule themselves. But the very core of his teaching has a familiar ring. Virtue means to love one another. This humanity's most profound moral sentiment was articulated by Confucius more than 500 years before the birth of Christ. Yet it was not intended as a religious principle. Confucius may have founded a religion, Confucianism, but his teachings were not religious per se. Nor, in fact, was his religion, and this Chinese puzzle has certainly contributed to its longevity. There is yet another twist to this paradox. Confucius's teachings may not have been religious, but he himself was, or appeared to be, mostly. On other occasions he was evasive. His sayings on this matter range from the fulsome to the enigmatic. How much either of these attitudes was dictated by expediency or political necessity we will never know. Confucius appears to have believed that the universe contains a power for the good, which some may regard as faith of the highest order, there being no observed evidence whatsoever to support such optimism. Confucius praised the virtuous man who lived in awe of heaven, but he considered most religious practices of his age to be superstitious nonsense. On the other hand, he delighted in ritual and saw its effects as highly beneficial. In this, as in much else, Confucius bears a striking resemblance to Socrates. Indeed, more than one great Orientalist has likened Confucius to a Socratic Christ. As well as vilifying three of history's greatest figures, this flabby calumny contains the usual irritating pearl of truth. The key element of Confucius's teachings was symbolized by the Chinese character Zhen. This stood for a conceptual blend of magnanimity, virtue, and love of humanity. It bears a close proximity to the Christian notion of compassion and loving kindness. Zhen is also said to have put the Zen into Zen Buddhism, though this took place several centuries after the death of Confucius. Along with Zhen, Confucius's teachings stress the complementary qualities of De, virtue, and Yi, righteousness. In everyday life he stressed the need for Li, decorum, and observance of traditional rites. But observance had to be a meaningful participation. When it became mere formality, this reflected a spiritual malaise, both in the individual and in the community. Confucius's aim was to produce Chunzu, superior individuals, who would live a life of harmony and virtue, free from anxiety and distress. Having said this, it's worth noting that Confucius's central notion of Zhen has given rise to a wide variety of interpretations. The word itself has been translated as anything from moral perfection to magnanimity, from humaneness to compassion, or even simple altruism. The Chinese character for Zhen is made up of two elements, that for man and that for two. Man plus two equals man to manness. In other words, Zhen is not concerned with individual spiritual morality, more with social behavior or moral character demonstrated in a public setting. Confucius makes this plain in his sayings, or Lun Yu, frequently referred to as the Analects. When asked the meaning of Zhen, Confucius replied, "It means to love your fellow human beings." Later he elaborates on this. There are 5 things, and whoever manages to put these into practice is Zhen. These are respectfulness, tolerance, trustworthiness, quick-witted diligence, and generosity. If a man is respectful, he will not be treated with insolence. If he is tolerant, he will win over the multitude. If he is trustworthy, then others will entrust him with responsibility. If he is diligent and quick-witted, he will achieve results. If he is compassionate, he will be good enough to be put in command of other men. Confucius saw Zhen as part of education. In other words, one had to be taught such behavior rather than simply learning it from experience. In his time, education was regarded as a matter of learning how to behave, rather than the acquisition of specific knowledge. Confucius concurred with this attitude. The acquisition of knowledge was wisdom, not Zhen. The latter not only involved morality, but also many traditional values, especially filial piety. This was much stronger than simple respect for one's parents, and involved taking on board their entire system of traditional values and rituals. Already by Confucius's time, the traditions of Chinese morality were well developed. The 2 key concepts were Tao and Te. Tao literally means the way, in the sense that Christ used the word when he said, "I am the light and the way." A more familiar Western equivalent would be truth, though this does not contain the progressive element present in Tao. It was vital for the individual's spiritual well-being that he adhere to the way, but Tao didn't apply just to individuals. An entire state might stray from the way. Confucius's attitude toward Tao was highly ambivalent. With gnomic irony he concluded, "He has not lived in vain who dies the day he is told about the way." Confucius had little time for the religion that grew out of this concept, Taoism. It represented an inwardness that caused the individual to withdraw from society. For Confucius, morality was all about involvement in society. On the other hand, he approved of the way when it referred to traditional moral observances. Ritual could be a great help in learning Zhen. The other key concept of traditional Chinese morality was De. This is usually translated as virtue, but also derives from the De that means to get. One gets virtue by following the way. But once again, Confucius is ambivalent here. At one point in his travels, when he was being pursued by the notorious Huan Tui and in danger of his life, Confucius expressed his equanimity as follows. Not a great technique for job interviews. Then, as now, people who couldn't get a job in their chosen field often ended up teaching it. The state of Lu boasted a number of schools teaching court etiquette and ritual to prospective courtiers. The fun-loving rulers had no wish to employ such a spoil-sport to run their domains, and Confucius's applications never got beyond the interview stage. Confucius was an earnest young man who believed in sharing his vast learning with the world, music and liturgy, quickly gaining a reputation as the most learned man in Lu. Confucius was ambitious. He hoped to achieve a high position in the administration so that he could put his ideas into practice. Not surprisingly, these schools were usually staffed by former courtiers who had an expert knowledge of intricate court observances, but had lost their job owing to some inadvertent gaffe, which may also have caused them to lose some intimate possessions, even fish Confucius had hoped for. Confucius was poor, and to make ends meet he took on a number of jobs, including clerk in a granary store and zookeeper to a menagerie of sacred animals. In his spare time he studied history,